Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Vanessa Fernbacher, and I'm the Marketing Manager at QAD Allocation. QAD Allocation is the leading provider of strategic sourcing and supplier management solutions to help manufacturers deploy digitized source-to-contract solutions. Today, we are presenting the webinar, Why Collaborative Supplier Relationships Cut Supply Risks. And today's big question is how to solve the problems you face daily while collaborating with your suppliers. The webinar will be presented by Bernard Saltman, Managing Director of QAD Allocation and a true specialist in this field. Just a little housekeeping before we get started. This webinar is placed in listen-only mode and will take 30 minutes. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your GoToWebinar control panel. We will have time for questions at the end. This webinar will be recorded and shared with you as soon as possible. Now, without further ado, let's start with the presentation. Bernard, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you everybody for attending today's session. I'm happy to present to you why collaborative supplier relationships cut risks, and I will always and also show you how we can use such systems to help us collaborate with the suppliers. My name is Bernard Saltman. I'm one of the managing directors and one of the founders of QED Allocation. QED Allocation was founded as Allocation Network in 1998. We have since January 1st become a QED division. We're happy to bring around 70 customers into the organization. About half of those customers are from the automotive industry. And as Vanessa said, we are digitizing direct and strategic indirect purchasing and supplier management processes for large organizations all over the world. You will hear about a couple of modules that we offer to our clients, such as supplier management, sourcing, auctions, and collaboration. All of these together form what we refer to as QAD SRM, and those solutions help our clients to digitize their procurement processes. If we look at what's on the agenda of procurement professionals, and ask the question, why do companies invest in digitizing supplier management and supply chain collaboration and source to contract? And why would they choose QED Allocation? We have to ask ourselves, what are the priorities of purchasing professionals, of supplier quality engineers, and supplier managers? The Hackett Group over the last couple of months came up with the CPO agenda, and the number one key issue on the agenda list was reduce spend cost. The runner-up was reduce supply risk. Well, have we seen a couple of supply risks coming up in the last 15 months? Yes, we did. And if we look at number 4 as an example, we have accelerate procurement digital transformation. QED Allocation is happy to help with 7 of those top 10 issues. And this is probably one reason why our clients choose to invest in us. There's another study that just recently came out over the last couple of weeks from Deloitte's global CPO survey. Pretty much similar results: driving operational efficiency, reducing costs, digital transformation were the top 3 tasks on the CPO agenda that they came up with. So it's clear that we need to act according to what we have. But let's take a step back and ask us, what is the problem with the way we're doing things at the moment? And those are daily problems of supplier professionals, of buyers, or supplier quality engineers. We have fragmented supplier data. We, as an organization, if we are the buyers, we know a lot about suppliers, but do we all have this information in one system? Well, we don't. We have, for example, a supplier with a certificate that was expired, and which is bad for our certification, might be bad or might become bad for our quality, things that we should be aware of. We have conflicting agreements with suppliers that we should be aware of or taking care of. And we're not leveraging all the know-how that we have in the organization when it comes to knowing about suppliers. So that is a solution. There's a solution to this problem, of course, which would be a proper supplier management system where all the information about suppliers would surface for the buyers to see them. And that system will be populated by the suppliers themselves, by everybody in the organization dropping information into this supplier management system, by the ERP system, of course, pushing data into the system, but also third-party data that can be tapped into. We like to, see it in two different phases that we have here. One would be the supplier relationship management basis, which means you need to be able to register new suppliers and qualify them according to your strategies, according to your requirements. You need to filter the interesting suppliers, which are innovative, which will give you an edge, from the suppliers that are Me Too suppliers and are not really bringing you any advantage. You need to control the data of your suppliers. You also need to control documents, as we said, certificates of your suppliers. This is a must-have. This is something we need to have, and it goes beyond what ERP systems usually store with suppliers. And the important thing is the suppliers keep their data and documents updated in the system. But there's more to transparency about suppliers. We need to know a lot to find out if the suppliers we're talking to today are able to work with us in the future as well. And that would involve risk management. Number 2 on the agenda, we get this information either by doing self-assessments within the own system, or we can tap into third-party sources such as Everstream, for example, or Risk Methods or Dun & Bradstreet, which give us risk information about suppliers, financial health information about suppliers, or coming up or on the agendas as well, how about compliance, corporate social responsibility, and other factors which enable us to really assess a supplier based on a 360-degree view about the supplier. Knowing what your supplier has done in the past, which would lead to a supplier rating or a supplier performance management, of course, action needs to follow. If I know something, if I know that my supplier is not acting according to what we expect the supplier to act in, we need to develop that supplier. We can't just drop suppliers. We're in a serious supply chain here, very often for direct material. So we need to make sure that the supplier understands where we need him to be, how good we need him to be, and that leads to supplier development that also should happen in one system. All of that is based on strategies, commodity strategies, regional strategies that allow us to really operationalize what we do on a strategic level, leading to where the company needs to go to and what purchasing has to do with those company goals. As an example, looking into how that looks like in the system, this is a 360-degree supplier scorecard that allows us, by using traffic light symbols or, of course, scores about suppliers to collect information about the compliance status of a company, environmental status of a company, or GDPR compliances of a company, depending on which material group you're in. We can also feed in the question if all the certificates are available that the supplier needs to have, if that supplier is supposed to supply us in a certain commodity. And we also would like to know more information about financial viability, for example, financial health of a supplier. And this is something we can get from third-party sources as an example here. All of the information coming from different systems, the supplier portal, the supplier themselves, our internal ERP systems, and everything else is then combined into a total supplier score, which enables us to really get our hands on how is the supplier performing at the moment, what have they done in the past, and where do we want to take the supplier in the future. Let's look at more problems that we are facing if we're a buyer. If we are a buyer and we want to run RFQs and we don't have a proper system, we will have to deal with email and spreadsheets being sent around, which is very quick to start with. But then if the first questions come back regarding RFQs from different suppliers, we are getting into trouble. What about revisions of the RFQ that we've laid out? What if my auditor would ask me, what has happened within this RFQ? Can we look back into an audit trail? Well, if you have that in your inbox of your Outlook or Gmail system, you're probably not able to pull that off right from the start. Bids are hard to compare, especially if you need to do side-by-side comparisons and you want to copy and paste the quotes of suppliers into one system. It's just work that shouldn't be done by a supplier. That's where a system comes handy, of course. And if you add more suppliers, of course, you're adding more work, but you want more suppliers in your evaluation. So a proper system will help you solve these problems, of course. As an example, we're showing you how a source to contract cycle, or more so a requisition to contract cycle, would be pictured or would be managed in a proper system. So requisitions come in from the ERP system or from PLM systems. So that means there is something that the purchasing needs to take care of. Purchasing then would use a template that is commodity specific, because we're purchasing injection molded parts differently than machined parts, and differently to a facility management RFQ that we're doing. So that's all part of the specifications that we need to deliver to our suppliers. Then we get the question, who do we invite for this RFQ? And there, the bidder list from the supplier management section comes handy, because we might have already agreed that one certain supplier that has performed very well in the past, where we have very good contracts with, we want this supplier to be a preferred supplier. So the supplier management system would help me pick the best suppliers out of the potential pool of suppliers that I have. The suppliers would then quote in the system in the predefined forms or templates that we have given them based on the material group they're quoting in. The system would automatically do a side-by-side comparison of the different quotes that came in from different suppliers. We can add annotations from our quality colleagues, from our logistics colleagues, which would help us really compare apples and apples within the quotes we've collected from the suppliers. And then we can go into negotiations, possibly using an auction, which is a very dynamic way of awarding business, but a very effective way also. But that's not the only way how to negotiate. So after certain rounds of negotiations that happen, we are pushing this into a recommendation loop, which would involve our management levels. If I'm a buyer and I'm awarding business for a multi-million-dollar project, I probably need my CFO to sign off on my recommendation. That's what happens in the system as well. And then once the award is established, we push the information down into the QED ERP systems or other ERP systems, and we can continue the process with the next RFQ that's coming up. So the full sourcing cycle that we used to have in an Outlook environment or in any other email program environment, using Excel sheets or Word documents, sending back and forth, that's time consuming and really error prone, has a very operational side to it, is not very strategic. That's stuff that a system can do, and we can focus on the strategic value that we bring into those programs. We need to be very flexible on the way. So these sourcing activities need a lot of flexibility that we need to deliver in the system. So we thought, well, everybody sort of loves Excel, at least the flexibility of Excel, but you get to hate Excel if you send around Excel sheets in different versions and everything. So we must have the flexibility of Excel without actually using it. And that's why we basically translated the Excel world into HTML, into a web application. And we can use the same functionalities that we're used to using Excel, but we use that in an HTML version. So the system renders these cost breakdowns, for example. So here you see, line item structure. We can have something that is more similar to a free form or a cost breakdown that we use for direct purchasing, as an example you see here. And if we continue to look at that, we don't want to use emails and spreadsheets anymore. We don't want any confusion around any revisions, any new versions of an RFQ, and we want to compare everything. So that's why we take it into a digital environment, which takes us from the Excel world that we've seen in the past, where we sent around stuff to suppliers, into an online form. It doesn't only look better, it also works better, and it's much easier to follow up upon. But you have the same flexibility, and the same calculations that are possible in Excel are actually possible in the online system as well. Let's look at more problems. Now that we've done the RFQ, we have a side-by-side comparison. We need to negotiate, and we need to, follow up with multiple rounds of bidding. It takes long. You might have suppliers in the Asia Pac region. You might have suppliers in the Americas and in Europe. It's tough to negotiate with a lot of suppliers at the same time, and that's where auctions can come in handy. Auctions are a dynamic way of negotiating with different suppliers at the same time. And there are different auction formats out there. We're not going to go into every detail. That's a webinar of its own. But you can imagine something like an auction. We usually use, of course, reverse auctions because we want the price to go down. So actually what we have here, we have a dynamic way of showing suppliers how they rank within our ranking relative to the other competitors that are out there, and the suppliers can lower their bids accordingly. Requirements that we have here, of course, for doing auctions is the better the higher the negotiation volume, the better your position to negotiate is. You need to establish complete comparability. You can't only compare euros to euros. That's one way of doing it. But what if one supplier or two suppliers give you the same quote, 150,000 euros, but one of them has proven to be a very good supplier in the past, has given you excellent supplier performance KPIs in the past, and the other one not so good, or you are not in an active relationship with that supplier. How do you compare them? And that's something that has to happen as well. The system can handle that for you. You can really compare apples to apples here. You need that comparability if you run the auction. You need competition, of course. The more competition, the better. Well, you need to have the right competition. That's where, again, supplier management would help you to line up the best suppliers that are out there, to know the best suppliers that are out there. And then you put commitment in and you basically say, you know what, may the best supplier win this business now. And then the auction starts and the different suppliers bid against each other. And this is what you're getting then. You're getting, a decreasing price, a true market price out of the competition that you've set up within a couple of minutes or a few hours, rather than face-to-face negotiation or a phone conversation with different suppliers, one after the other, and again and again and again. So in order to make the best out of the negotiation process, in order to be also audit-proof, this is a systematic or a method that is really helpful to negotiate as well. Last but not least, our job as a buyer doesn't end there. We have a lot of processes that happen between us and the supplier that also would require some digitization, and that's where we use our module collaboration. As an example, very often this module is used for supplier quality processes, because once you've awarded the business in a direct environment, you want to be able to make sure that the supplier actually delivers the product in a serious state as well, not only as a prototype, not only as a pre-series manufacturing sample, but also at the start of production. You need the product to be in perfect shape. You need the logistics concept to add up. You need quality to be without any doubt. And then your SOP is not in danger. So there are a lot of processes out there which involve the supplier, where you would usually send out again, forms, PDFs, spreadsheets, and things like this. This is also where a digitization can, of course, help, where you can line up the workflow as you need it, and the system will help you manage the processes that you're doing with those suppliers. So you see here, for example, here an easy example of a supplier audit process that you can do in a web front end, and everybody internally can benefit from those workflows. The workflow is designed in the system as well, and all of that combined is a problem solver for you. Yeah, we need to do supplier management, we need to do sourcing, we need to negotiate with suppliers, and there's a lot of collaboration with suppliers, but usually companies are lacking the proper system to do that. And Outlook is ill-equipped to handle that. So digitize it, put it in a proper solution. QED SRM can help and make sure you get the best out of your purchasing organization. How does it pay off? We would only do that. We would only change our behaviors and implement a system if it actually pays off. And there's an independent study from the Association of Materials Management in Germany, along with the University of Würzburg and the University in Leipzig, that shows that there are both process cost efficiencies, but also unit price savings that we get out of using an electronic digitized sourcing process. And if you look at the unit prices alone, to get 10% better prices when you're using an e-sourcing solution as opposed to a manual way of doing business with your suppliers, that payoff is obvious. And auctions, same story. The negotiations yield results that are way and beyond what usually buyers would expect. But that immediate competition is really driving the price down. And eventually, we as procurement professionals, we have an essential impact on the earnings of our organizations. And another study, just again a recent study, a global purchasing excellence study of McKinsey, shows that the procurement leaders, the companies that have their act together, that are digitizing, that are doing the right things, they get almost twice as high EBITDA margins as the procurement followers. And that's a huge difference. Our typical customers have a manufacturing background, and in the manufacturing industries, purchasing has a direct impact of more than 50+% of total cost, but also 100% of the quality of your product. And that's something that has been proven here by McKinsey, that showed that the procurement leaders are, dwarfing anybody else's EBITDA margins on the markets. Which companies are using the system? Well, a lot of very diverse companies are using the system. We already mentioned that manufacturing is a stronghold within our client base, especially automotive is using the system. As an example, we have just signed the 5th OEM to use our one of our modules. We have more than 30 tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers that are using the system, but we also see other verticals in the system here. We see utilities providers, we see pharmaceutical manufacturers, we see food and beverage companies that are using the system. So a lot of different companies are using the system, and they use it internationally with thousands or tens of thousands of internal users and hundreds of thousands of suppliers, and providing the system in more than 14 languages at the moment ensures also that the system can be used worldwide. So this is it for now. This is how customers reach or procurement organizations reach world class regarding quality, costs, and processes. We'd be happy to show you deeper, also in a product demo, of course, how this works, how this relates to your vertical, to your industry, to your purchasing organizations. So please do contact us. We're really looking forward to speaking with you further. And I'm sure that you have some questions that came up. And Vanessa, I would ask you to jump in and let me know if we have questions lined up from the audience.
Thank you, Bernard. Yeah, we actually got some questions. So the first question is, what is the average project lead time?
Okay, yes. The average lead time, you can say that an average lead time is below 6 months. That's a good thing to say. We like to do projects that deliver immediate results, that immediately help. So we usually have phased projects. We implement module by module to enable the customer to start using the system already after maybe 3 months. And then we add these process modules, like you've seen, sourcing or collaboration, to help with the source to contract process. So it's a good average to say just below 6 months is something that is very well possible. But of course, it depends on availability of our customers as well, and it depends on the IT departments of our clients, because of course, once interfaces to PLM systems, to the ERP systems, or to multiple ERP systems are involved, this is something that could take a little longer, but yeah, so I would say just below 6 months is a good average of large and smaller clients.
And then we got a second question, Bernard. Is it a standalone solution or is it integrated within other solutions?
It can be used as a standalone solution. That is very well possible. But over the last years, with the standardization of interface technologies using web services, using APIs, integrations have technically become much easier than they were in the past. So the usual clients that we help, they want other systems to be integrated. I've mentioned PLM systems, for example. If you talk about direct spend or products that you're purchasing from suppliers in order to assemble your own end product, but also of course ERP systems. And then we have third-party systems like risk management or financial health information providers, again, interfaces, of course. So it can be used as a standalone, but it makes a lot of sense to consider interfaces. And as I said, the technical implications of interfaces have become very easy because they are very standardized.
Awesome. It looks like we've covered all of your questions. Thank you again, Bernard, for your presentation, and thank you, dear attendees, for being here. All webinar recordings of the Insights series are made available on the QAD external website. We will include the link to the on-demand page and the slide deck in the follow-up email after this webinar. One final question from our side: help us to improve and score the webinar on this page after ending this session, and leave a remark if needed. So stay tuned for future webinars. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time.